Today is Monday, June 23rd, 2025, and this is episode 311 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
I am so good it hurts. How are you doing?
I am doing well. I had a good weekend, and we had a little gaming expo thing here in town with a bunch of video games and pinball games here in Atlanta that I went to and saw some friends. Played some video games.
Awesome.
It's a good time. And, then came home and did adulting and power washed my deck. So, it was a give and take kind of weekend.
Good to hear. Good to hear. I rebuilt the engine on my power washer. So that was my adulting and fun for the weekend.
And did it work?
Yes.
Didn't end up with any spare parts after, and you weren't sure where they went?
I did have to buy a whole new carburetor. I will admit to that, but other than that, it went okay. You know what?
In this day and age, at least you just didn't throw it out and buy a new one. You took a shot at repairing it and it worked. So that's something.
Although I have to tell you, I had no idea what I was in for. The carburetor it's a nice pressure washer. The carburetor was like $15, like whole ass carburetor, $15.
I wonder if it's used in like many, many, many small engines. So it's just a commodity. Yeah, that is impressive though. And for kids today who don't know what a carburetor is, Google it. Anyway, neither here nor there, but we'll have to talk more later because I'm curious how you diagnosed it as the carburetor issue, but we'll spare the listeners for that diatribe.
TikTok told me what it was.
All right.
So just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and not those of our employers.
Welcome, Jerry Small Engine Repair. On today's episode.
That's right. We had a whole new podcast spinning up here now, yes. And thank you again to our continued Patreon sponsors. Thank you very much. If you do want to sponsor us, it's patreon.com/defensivesec. Sorry.
Yes, let me echo. Thank you. You guys are awesome. Even though we do have some new sponsors, Patreon comes a long way to help us.
Yes, would you like to introduce our new sponsor for this week?
I feel like since I did the voiceover, you should do the intro.
All right, we have a new clothing brand for IT people, and so we're gonna play our first spot right now.
This episode is sponsored by Funk Defender Executive Line. Underwear for CISOs who carry the weight of the enterprise, the blame for every incident, and an ulcer the size of a sock tube binder. Whether you're on your third red-eye flight this week, rehearsing how to explain MFA to a hostile CFO, or mentally preparing for a board meeting where we haven't been breached is somehow not good enough, you need support. Real support. That's why Funk Defender Executive is designed with breach-resistant fibers that won't give under pressure even when your budget does. Crisis-cool tech fabric. Specifically engineered to keep you composed while legal and PR says we've decided not to disclose. Zero slide waistband for smooth transitions between calm strategy voice and we are so screwed tone. Plus a discreet pocket for your resignation letter updated quarterly. Use promo code ITOLDYOUSO to get 10% off your first set, plus a free sticker that says this wouldn't have happened if I ran engineering. You expected to be a visionary, a diplomat, a scapegoat, a miracle worker at 3% of the IT budget. But at the end of the day, you still put your pants on one leg at a time. Make sure what's underneath them can carry the load. Funk Defender Executive, because even when everything else is on fire.
All right. I posted this on Mastodon already, and there's already people lining up to buy them. So that's pretty good.
I mean,
they're getting their money's worth.
It's a needed product. That's all I can say.
Absolutely.
And who knows? There might be more from the Funk Defender brand. We'll have to see what comes next week.
And the week after. The week after,
and maybe even the week after.
All right, let's jump into some stories here. The first one comes from, actually, I think most of them come from Bleeping Computer this week. First one comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is "No, the 16 billion credentials leak is not a new data breach." So if unless you've been living under a rock, the big news in the security world has been this, gigantic breach of 16 billion credentials, which the story here is a little interesting. There was a batch, actually, I think it was 4 or 5 different batches of like 3.5 gigabytes each, very briefly exposed, and long enough for a researcher to see them and see that they were formatted. These dumps were formatted in a way that looked like how normal info stealers store their stolen credentials. And they did the math and came up with the number of leaked credentials, and this story just caught on fire, and it ran all around the news media, and I think it was even on the local news here in Atlanta at one point. But the reality is a little bit different. This is actually not indicative of a new breach. Now, it's not to say, by the way, that amongst the 16 billion credentials that there aren't some that weren't previously compromised. Like, you can't guarantee that, but as a whole, the preponderance of these appear just to be like more and more amalgamated existing data breaches, kind of combined, reformatted, and stuck together. And by the way, I think this is going to become more of a consistent problem. Like, I say that because of the splash that this made, right? It was made such such amount of hoopla that I have a hard time thinking that we're not going to see, this 16 billion credential dump combined with, a bunch of other dumps, which may already be included in the 16 billion. And suddenly there's a 25 billion credential dump, and then a 50 billion credential dump, and then 100 billion credential dump. I think we're going to see a lot more of this going forward. And, we're going to have some fatigue around it if we don't temper ourselves a little bit.
Going to have?
Yeah.
Look, who's going to challenge your math anyway? I could say it's 100 billion. Who's going to,
That's right.
Look, right. I demand my credential leaks be deduplicated before sent to me.
As you should. Honestly, like that's a reasonable request, I think.
This was maddening because, like you said, it got all over the press. So immediately executives found it and start demanding we do something.
It's a huge number. Like, tell me if, tell me that my people are, how many of our credentials are in here, and what are we doing to rotate our passwords? And
Right. And of course, here's the first problem. I don't know. I don't have access to the data dump. Nobody, It was briefly made public. It's not available. It hasn't been added to have I been pwned or anything. And how many? This is always the challenge. A password, once it is out in the wild, can live forever, even if it was rotated eons ago. Like, how do you know? Mm-hmm. It's such a low fidelity, low value stat. It's very frustrating to see this sort of thing flow out here. And it's tough to even have a rational conversation with an executive when they see this and they're reacting to it. But I mean, that's my job. Like, I've got to find a way. So telling them not to worry, it's like proving a negative. It's very tough.
Having said all that, I think it's a reminder. It's a good reminder that, info stealers and password breaches are a thing. Like, they do happen. They happen all the time. And it really highlights, I think, the importance of, better password hygiene, using unique passwords for every service, using, random passwords using multi-factor authentication, using passkeys where you can. So I don't think we should just kind of ignore it, but I also think it's we didn't do the right thing here as an industry.
I could have generated 16 billion random character strings and had the same impact. Yeah. It did spur an interesting thought, though. Let's say you're a software vendor, or you have your SaaS platform or a cloud provider, and something like this happens. What obligation does that vendor have to check if their customers' passwords to their service are included in something like this? And what obligation do they have to notify or force a password change in that circumstance?
It's a good question. And I will tell you, we did it a couple of times, and it was sort of maddening. I think after a while we just hit the easy button and said, you know what, like we can't just have customers with a static password anymore. They have to move to multi-factor. So that was the exit from that loop. I will tell you, like on a more personal note, very recently on my Mastodon instance, there's lots of security researchers, one of which slid me a copy of. They came into possession of a command and control system for a password stealing enterprise, and had a bunch of infosec.exchange credentials.
Well, I mean, then that's a great example without putting you on the spot. Do you have an obligation to go do the legwork of, notifying those users, forcing a password reset, and then dealing with, it's a little odd because you're a free service, but let's say you weren't. Let's say infosec.exchange was a paid subscription service, and these are paid customers, and you have SOC analysts, and you go to notify customers that their password was caught in this info stealer. That opens up a whole can of worms. And are you obligated? Should you do it? Do you need to tell them that? Do you just trigger a password reset without explanation? Or are you going to set yourself up for that customer coming back and asking you a whole bunch of questions like, what do I do? How do I do this? What should I do? Where did this happen? Like, if their password hygiene and their local password that they set was stolen, what do you, as the password custodian, I guess if that's the right word, of the other end of that password conversation, owe that person?
This I think gets into like maybe a new field, an emerging field of cyber philosophy. But there was an interesting story or news story recently. I think it was last week, about 23andMe being fined by the UK ICO because they had a big data breach, and the data breach happened because people's IDs, and it wasn't like that their service got hacked. It was that bad guys were logging in with stolen credentials. They were kind of brute forcing user email address and password pairs that were collected from other breaches, like probably the 16 billion credential breach, and getting in some large number of circumstances. And obviously the kinds of data that 23andMe stores would be considered, I think it was special categories data is what they called it. I know the UK isn't under GDPR anymore, but they have like their own kind of GDPR like thing. But it's like the most sensitive data that you can think of. Like it's pretty sensitive. Anyway, they got fined because they didn't acknowledge that their customer accounts were being hacked. And so I think it's a tenuous answer to that question, but I think there's an implication that, hey, like, you should have realized that your customers' passwords were out in the field. Now, on the other end, on the other end, I was just reading through the NIST, some of the NIST password guidance. I forget the
because
SP number.
It's what you do. It's why you're fun at parties.
I'm not working right now. So what else am I going to do? Like, you got to read the NIST documents.
That's it.
And one of the requirements was that you check when people set or reset a password, that you should check to see if that password has been part of a breach. But then they do make a footnote, and I don't have the actual wording with me, so I'm going to paraphrase it. But they do make a footnote that, like, the larger the set of passwords that you compare against, the less effective that becomes as a control.
And what is your source of truth on that?
I don't know.
And interestingly, like that the same username and password pair, or just the password pair? Because people unwittingly reuse other people's passwords all the time because they invent the same password.
I think that was the point that they were trying to make was, you're constraining, kind of like it's a tortured analogy, right? But when you tell people that their password has to be 8 characters long and has to have a special character, a number, and an uppercase, like that actually radically limits like the total space, the total number of combinations of possible passwords. And so I think it's probably a very similar kind of logic there.
But it would be really inappropriate for me to say you're using the same password somebody else has, because now I've just revealed that is a valid password somebody else has. So
not one that somebody else has.
Somebody else has breached.
So it's an example, like using this 16 billion, like putting that into a database, and then when somebody goes and changes their password, does that password exist in this database?
Yeah, it's interesting. I got to think about that one a little bit. It feels like that is fraught with peril.
Well, they also say don't rotate your passwords, which is also fraught with peril.
Which I disagree with. I understand that that's taken out of context. I understand there's more to that story. But I think for the average consumer in the average situation, this is a perfect example of passwords are like Funk Defender underwear, should be changed often. See that callback?
Early enough. And that was good. That was slick. Just like the underwear.
Someday we're going to have to actually make these and actually sell them.
Yes. All right. So I think we beat that one to death. All right. The next story, again, also comes from Bleeping Computer. And the title here is Russian Hackers Bypass Gmail MFA Using Stolen App Passwords. I thought this was worth talking about because it is applying kind of an innovative angle to an old problem. As services like Gmail and others become more sophisticated, we're seeing the attacks move to kind of adjacent capabilities. And by that I mean, we've seen threat actors going after like OAuth tokens and that sort of thing. And in this instance, the threat actor here is spoofing. In the case that we're talking about here, they were pretending to be from the U.S. Department of State, and they were targeting some number of people. It wasn't clear to me exactly how they were selecting their targets, but they were like academics and critics of Russia and who knows who else. But they would send an email out from someone purporting to be the Department of State, and they point out, by the way, this is pretty clever, picked a persona that doesn't actually exist in the Department of State, and they sent the email from a Gmail address, but copied like the person's what appeared to be their personal Gmail address. So it was like, I forget the person's name, but like Amy Smith. I'm going to make it up right now, but it wasn't Amy Smith. So it was Amy Smith's Gmail address, but they copied Amy Smith at the Department of State's actual domain name. And that relied on the fact that the Department of State doesn't actually reject bad email addresses. And so it looked like it was actually going to someone when in fact it wasn't. So they were they were leveraging that.
If you replied to it, you didn't get a bounce back. So
Exactly.
Looked like somebody got it and just ignored you or whatever. It looked more legitimate.
Exactly. So at some point they asked after building a bit of a rapport, they asked the victim, their Mark, to create an app-specific password in their Gmail account. And they actually provided a document that walks, like a PDF document, a non-malicious PDF document, by the way, that walks you through creating an app-specific password. And then they ask for that app-specific password to be shared with the Department of State help desk in order to get you added to a communications facility, so that you have an ongoing ability to communicate with them. By the way, it wasn't Amy Smith; it was Claudie S. Weber was the name of the person. I just saw it. So once the victim here provided that app-specific password, it actually provides the threat actor here with full access to their Gmail address or to their Gmail account without the need, the inconvenience of having to go through the problem of finding the password and cracking multi-factor authentication, because like that password gives them all the access they need. There's no multi-factor authentication required there.
Right. So these app passwords are specifically built for when you have multi-factor authentication in an interactive login to your Gmail, for instance, but you still want to use something automated like your phone's mail app or Outlook or something that isn't an interactive login, so it can't prompt for MFA. So they say, cool, here, you can still make a static password. So you're basically defaulting back to a specific use static password. Now, you can try to lock it down to a specific use case and you can add some controls around it, but nonetheless, you're still rolling back to making a static password because we have technology that cannot accommodate any sort of MFA today that they have to accommodate for these tools. So even if you've got full MFA turned on for your interactive web-based login to Gmail, this completely bypasses that in a completely supported way that a bad actor can just do what they want with, which is, I don't know that people fully understand that. I mean, it makes sense if you understand the technology that we've got to have some way for these non-interactive logins to still do what they do, but it really undercuts the security of a MFA-enabled account for sure.
And the story is about Google and Gmail, but there are similar concepts that apply to Office 365. So it's not, I don't think this is a dig on Google. I think it's a dig on the concept. And Google does, by the way, point out that you should, for anybody who is likely to be a victim of this kind of attack, you can turn on the Advanced Protection Program, which has a bunch of additional security monitoring and also disables the ability to create app-specific passwords, which I suppose is maybe inconvenient in some cases.
The other thing I thought was interesting is they're almost leveraging what looks like you're using your Google account to create a secure password like you had a password generator. Like they sort of walked you down it like you went to a password manager to create a password for something generically, and you don't realize you're actually making a password for your own Gmail. So it's very clever. It's a very smart attack. And it's yet another thing. And I don't know that a lot of people understand the complexity of this. It's not a commonly understood issue. Like you might set this up once to get your Outlook working or your phone's mail app working and then forget about it. And then, this pops up 2 years later and you're like, okay, I'll go do this, and not even realize what this functionality is for.
Absolutely. I think this, by the way, is for instances where like even the normal OAuth type, because I've had a Gmail account for 20 years shortly after they started having Gmail accounts, and I don't think I've ever created an app password like this.
Yeah, I've got a couple out there. I probably shouldn't say that, but when you turn on full MFA, you've got to do it for certain things to be able to log into Gmail on a scheduled basis.
All right. So moving on to our next story. This one, again, comes from Bleeping Computer. You can tell where I was spending my time this week. And the title here is North Korean hackers deepfake execs in Zoom call to spread Mac malware. This was a fairly clever attack. The threat actor here was communicating with their victims over Telegram, and we're using different lures, and would send them after an agreement to meet. And I think a lot of this was, by the way, crypto. So it's all like everything comes back to crypto lately. So anyway, there was some agreement to meet. The threat actor sends a Calendly link, which appears to be a Google Meet session, but it's actually a fake Zoom themed domain that's owned by the attackers. When the victim joins the meeting, actually it is a web meeting. Like it does work. Like they do join the meeting. But here's where it gets clever. The setup that they have makes it so that the victim's audio doesn't work, like their microphone doesn't work. And so there's people on the other end of the meeting who, again, it's a deep fake attack. So they're made to look like recognizable people in the company of the victim. So like your CFO, your CEO, perhaps even your boss. I'm guessing it depends on like who they have video of to use to create the deep fake.
They just got to be careful not to do a deep fake of the target of themselves. Then one of you has shown up at your own meeting, and that just throws everything.
That would be awkward.
It would be awkward. And which is the real you? Which it could have been a transporter accident, and it could have been, who's the real one? Who's the evil one? Who's going to steal the Defiant? I don't know.
I don't know. I would just say, like, I guess I'm not needed here because I'm already there. Disconnect.
Do you have to share your paycheck? There's a lot of questions that happen.
Yeah. Did they have to like their own background check? And what did they find?
Anyway,
I have so many questions.
I digress. I'm just saying, if you're conducting a deepfake attack, make sure you don't have your target there as a deepfake.
It's sensible. Like
pro tip.
There must be like a field manual for running deepfake operations, and I'm sure that's probably early in the document. I'm guessing. So anyway, the threat actors here, they are portraying recognizable people who are recognizable to the victim on this Zoom call, and those people are unable to hear the victim, and so they tell the victim to download this Zoom extension. Well, of course, the Zoom extension is the malware, right? And then it's off to the races. And they have a couple of different flavors of malware that get installed. Everywhere, anything from a backdoor to a keyboard logger to a cryptocurrency info stealer, which again, it's all crypto. It's all crypto. At this point, if you've got some kind of crypto stuff going on, like you better have your act together because there's a lot of people coming after you.
I mean, I've got some cryptozoology stuff going on.
Yes, we are all aware of that.
Nobody seems to be trying to steal that though, which is kind of sad.
Very disappointing. It's also very interesting. This was focused on Macs. Like this specific attack at least was very focused on Macs. However, the malware actually, part of the loader of the malware, makes sure that you have the x86 compatibility layer installed. And if you don't, it actually installs it for you because they don't have their malware. It actually doesn't work on Apple native silicone, I guess. So,
dude, that takes time.
I guess it's coming in the next version, right?
Next version. That's right. It's on the roadmap.
Probably what the product managers or the salespeople are saying.
It's on the roadmap. It'll be there.
On the road. It's on the roadmap. Next version. It's just renew.
I was, I was wondering. Like, I mean, I know this is like not something you suggest to most people, but in a Windows desktop enterprise environment, we try to take away local admin rights from Windows boxes for this sort of thing, right? The bad actor tries to load something, and they either can't, or if they load, they're not going to run as admin. I'd be very curious in this environment. There are certain enterprise grade tools or methodologies to restrict the average enterprise user of Mac from having local admin rights. And I'd be curious if this particular script requires local admin to run, or if that sort of control would limit the danger here. But the hope is at that point, if you can't install it, you would contact your IT department to grant you rights to install it, and they would go, "Wait, you're doing what? Hold up, Stack. Let's talk about this," kind of thing. But I don't know. I would have to grab this and try it on a Mac configured thusly.
I infer that this attack is not going after like the super mature companies, and I think that a lot of the solutions that you mentioned are weighty and expensive and challenging to implement and manage, and probably don't scale down well. And so I'm going to guess that a lot of the smaller startup, small companies running Macs probably don't have that.
Probably true. I'd also love to throw a common EDR at this and see how it reacts without any special tuning. That's like I've said this so many times in the past. When we see these pwn to own contests that are like raw native, attack against X, I'm like, cool. Now go get these people to say they stop breaches and put their code in default configuration mode and try it again. And let's see. Novel new attack, never seen before. How well do you do? But nobody's taken me up on that plan yet.
Good idea. Yeah,
I'm full of good ideas that nobody cared about. Full of them.
Yes, you are. Full of them.
Must not be that good then.
All right. Our last story for today comes from socket.dev. It's a new site to me, but I thought this was a really good article and would spawn some discussion. Title here is libxml2 maintainer ends embargoed vulnerability report citing unsustainable burden. So there's a very widely used open source package called libxml2, which I think you can probably use your imagination to figure out what its purpose is, which is included in damn near everything now, right? It was, I think, first deployed in Apple, and then it was pulled into Chrome, and then it was pulled into Windows. And I mean, it is on billions of devices, and libxml2 is maintained by one person, just one, part-time, by the way. Like that's
how does that not just scare the living pants off of CTOs everywhere? I'll save my commentary. Continue with the story.
So that's the whole. I mean, that is the whole gist of this story. Is that it should be pretty alarming the way in which. And by the way, this isn't a slam on. I want to get it out, out in front of it, right? This is not Jerry saying open source is bad or like the strategy of using open source is bad. It is that the concept of becoming extremely reliant on a piece of open source technology that has one developer and being used by all of these large companies who are really not supporting that in any way, shape, or form, and then coming around and beating them on the head, which is what this story is really about, is just not a sustainable thing. So what's being discussed here, and this person is not backing off on supporting or maintaining libxml2. It's that they just don't have the ability to play the vulnerability disclosure game. And so what he's made a change so that now when somebody identifies the vulnerability, it gets opened in a GitHub issue and gets worked in the normal course of their development program. The implication there is that, number one, the vulnerability is documented in an issue for all to see. And number two, there's no SLA or commitment on when it's going to get fixed, which, back to your point, should scare the pants off of CTOs everywhere. And I feel for this guy. Like he makes the comment that, he's been trying to do the right thing. He tried to join OpenSSF, right? And he makes the comment that OpenSSF is trying to, in his words, like shame open source contributors into, responding to vulnerability disclosures in a timely manner. And so he tried to join OpenSSF. Again, keep in mind, part-time volunteer person. And he was told that he would have to spend $10,000 a year to join the Linux Foundation in order to become a member of this organization that would then help, so it's, again, like this is just not a healthy ecosystem. Now, it's not in here, by the way, and I did want to talk about it a bit. There's another person, different package. There's I forget his name. He maintains the curl package, the Linux curl package. And he's very active on Mastodon, and he's been just railing on AI generated bug reports. And so I don't know if this is a similar kind of
mess. Yeah, I see him in my day job. They are a mess.
So, his point is like, I'm a volunteer. I'm like, this is a hobby. It's obviously a very popular thing, but like we have to inject sanity in here. And I think the problem is that something is going to fall through the cracks. Like this is going to cause something bad to happen. And I'm not, by the way, blaming the maintainers here. Right?
I agree. So the way this plays out, and that they get a bug or vulnerability, they are expected to deal with it like a commercial entity with an SLA and report back to whoever the so let's play this out. Let's pick IBM for a minute. IBM's got a piece of code that uses this in it. I don't know this is true. I'm just making this up. IBM gets a vulnerability report or a disclosure to them. They come to this guy and say, you need to fix this in X number of days. And by the way, you can't talk about it because we're doing, disclose vulnerable or responsible disclosure policy. This is embargoed, blah, 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 and get it done by this date or else. There is, I don't know what or else is because they have no power here. But this guy is like, I just do this like, in between my kids' soccer games, go away. Like, I don't have time for this crap. Times 500 companies coming at him. I completely understand his position. And as I take a step back, as I work for a software vendor, like this scares me. Like, I'm not blaming the open source people at all. I'm blaming all the commercial entities that take these open source components and utilize them with this underlying expectation that they're being maintained at an enterprise grade level. And that is not the case, nor should it have ever been the case. And that is not what was intended by the open source movement, in my opinion. And I almost ask, with this in mind, knowing what we know, is it irresponsible for these companies to be utilizing these packages in this way? Like, if I'm expecting my vendor to be able to maintain and support and fix my software, right, when they have a vulnerability, and they don't control the entire downstream ecosystem or have agreements in place or SLA, like that liability isn't, like there's no throat to choke downstream. There's no accountability. There's no ownership that is guaranteed, nor do I think there should be if you're open source, right? Open source, their licensing is saying, this is what I'm doing, right? You can take it or leave it. I'm not. And these bigger companies are pushing this expectation on them without their consent. And that without any sort of remuneration either, without any sort of payment or anything. So I'm starting to come back to, by the way, I don't think this is ever going to change for the record, but I'm coming back to, we shouldn't be using these packages in anything that we're trying to do anything with security around, because there's no accountability. Now, those upstream companies could fork it and fix it and contribute back, and they're supposed to. But right now, we just have this finger pointing game of, oh, that's a third party package that we're waiting on them to fix.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hold up. If you're waiting on that, like if I'm in a critical path of a company, I have to sign an agreement with them of what my expectations are, and are to fix something in a certain amount of time and the penalties and everything. There's a problem that open source software and the way we're utilizing it doesn't fit into that liability model. And I'm not doing a good job of explaining this. I know you know what I'm saying, but probably for the listeners, I probably sound like I'm talking in circles. How can I hold a business accountable that I'm paying money to when they don't have the ability to influence all the way down the path via contractual obligations? Is the question, right? Like if they're buying widgets from Taiwan, they've got a business agreement with that Taiwanese manufacturer for a certain level of quality and control, and it's based on what they're paying for. But when you introduce free software that's maintained part-time, that all breaks down. And I'm not ripping on the open source movement at all. God love them. It's more the commercial entities who have set the expectation that this is well-maintained software they're using across the board. That is not the case. And we have signed up for this level of liability transfer without fully understanding that they cannot transfer that fully. Does that make any sense, or am I just rambling incoherently?
So we used to call it going back to having back-to-back contracts. So you sell a contract to a customer, and that contract is in part based on stuff that you get from your own vendor, and you have to have a contract that is back-to-back. Like it you can't or shouldn't sell something that is dependent on a third party, which when that third party can't meet the obligation of the thing you sold, like you're taking an enormous risk there. And the issue here is that there's no contract in place with open source. So there's like you just implicitly can't go back to back. Now, this was something that, I struggled with, quite a lot. And I would tell my people, like, using open source is like adopting a puppy. You are responsible for it. It is, you have adopted, when you incorporate some open source component into your code, you have adopted a puppy. And, sometimes somebody will help you out and care and feed it. But if nobody does that, it's still your responsibility. It is your puppy at the end of the day. If there's a vulnerability in there and nobody's fixing it, it is on you to fix it. Full stop. And the problem is that it's like, okay, Jerry, like, we don't have a puppy. We have like 200,000 puppies. And that's not an over exaggeration, right? I mean, there's a lot of packages that get incorporated into the average, even commercial application these days. And so this is a problem that has gotten away from us in grand fashion. And I don't know where we go from here. I do think that, the responsible thing to do, like the easy way, and I think what was intended to happen with Linux Foundation and OpenSSF was, in the aftermath of Shell Shock and Heartbleed and those things, they were going to come together. They were going to create this funding mechanism where, large companies like the IBMs and the Red Hats and the HPEs and, they would all pay in, and then that money would get distributed out to different key programs. And that was what I think what this person was saying, that he would have to pay in $10,000 to become part of that, to become part of that program, which is not sustainable. Like it's a hobby. Like I don't have $10,000 to join the Linux Foundation. At some level, that concept makes sense, but it's not well implemented. And then you get to the question, like, well, I'm a startup, so does that mean I have to pay like thousands of dollars into the Linux Foundation because I want to use open source. Like, so what's the model here? Like, do you pay a percentage of your revenue? Do you pay like per package? Do you pay like, how does that work? And it kind of trends to silliness, I think. And we just don't have a good answer. I think the Linux Foundation and OpenSSF were a good idea, and to the extent that they do work, I think I think it's I think it's an important function or capability that we have, but like it's limited in scope. It was intended to only focus on, I don't know how they come up with what they focus on, but there was a recognition that like there are certain really fundamental components like OpenSSL that were not getting the attention that they needed, and therefore like we needed an industry response to those. But I think this is pointing out that there's a hell of a lot more going on than just a handful of OpenSSL level things. Like libxml2 is used freaking everywhere, and it's not on anybody's anybody's radar at that in that kind of context. At least that's what it looks like.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't know how to solve it, other than this is scary, and probably an underrealized and underappreciated risk. And I don't blame this guy for saying, I'm not playing your game anymore. I'll deal with it as I deal with it. If you don't like it, don't use my package. I'm not making you use my package.
Right. And look, it is very conceivable because, I mean, let's just hypothetically say there is an RCE, worst case scenario, right? In libxml2. The future state is that will get opened up as a Git issue, and people will understand that the issue exists and perhaps how to exploit it long before there is a fix. That's the implication here. Again, not knocking the guy, but
all the data,
what's happening.
Yeah, all the data will be clearly visible in the repo. And yeah, again, not knocking the guy, but we have this implicit expectation now that we've built that this is not compatible with. And that's where I'm trying to figure out, like, what do we do? And it's not, I don't think it's realistic to say all of you various commercial package vendors pick a different package or build your own or what. Like, I don't know. I don't see an easy way out of this. I mean,
there's no obvious answer, like, because you can't, like, you're not going to have thousands of companies all building their own XML library. And I don't see any company stepping up and saying, oh, I have the commercial version of libxml2, which, by the way, I think is kind of what's happened to a lot of open source packages that have gone quasi commercial, with the whole, I forget the name of the cloud license model that has taken hold. But like there's no, like, at every option you have has like structural inhibitors that say this is just not workable. So as we stand here today, I feel like we've dug ourselves into such a deep hole. Like, we're looking up and don't see any way to get out right now.
And on that cheery note,
yeah. Well, look, it's an opportunity. There's smart people in this world, a hell of a lot smarter than me. Maybe somebody can come up with a solution that I just can't envision, and that's
I imagine there are folks deep in the free and open source world who have thought much more deeply than you and I have in this, our little 20-minute rant on this topic. But I think it's good to raise awareness of this topic and be realistic about what we expect of people that aren't signing up for this level of liability and expectation that we're applying to them just because they put some code together and threw it out there for other people to use if they wanted.
So the other issue that I wanted to throw out here is, well, we know about this because it got picked up by, this socket.dev website. If that hadn't happened, how would you know, right? How many other open source, important and widely used open source packages have already adopted a similar posture without you realizing?
That's true. And who in your organization is even keeping an eye on that?
Mm-hmm.
We just grab these packages willy-nilly and don't think about that. Don't worry about the ecosystem. Don't worry about the downstream. Don't worry. We just assume they're just going to be maintained and fine. And yeah, it's frustrating to me. I feel like we are signing ourselves up for pain the way we're handling it right now.
Mm-hmm. There's just a disconnect. And it's going to have to get worked out. I don't know how it gets worked out, but it will get worked out. And I think the reason it's going to get worked out is because there's going to be some pain.
That is usually a good motivator.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like we could sit here and say this is coming all day long, but until you touch the hot stove,
yeah. We're just trying to let you know it's coming. That's all. So anyway, that is the show for today. A little bit shorter than normal, although actually not that much shorter. So thank you everybody for listening. Hope you have a wonderful week. It's certainly crazy times, and hopefully you're doing well. You can find links to the stories we talked about on our website at defensivesecurity.org. Just look for episode 311. We'll also drop a link to our Patreon page in case you are interested in sponsoring us. Also a reminder, by the way, that assuming I'm on the top of my game, we do have a video version of these shows. So if you're listening on audio, there is a full video. There's an audio only and a video version that's posted on YouTube. So if you are so interested, you can see our ugly mugs.
And occasionally cats.
There's no cats around today, but anyhow, you can find me if you would like to get in touch. You can find me on my Mastodon server. It's at Jerry@infosec.exchange. And where can people find you?
I am at Lerg, L-E-R-G, on both X and your amazing Mastodon server, infosec.exchange. And also I kick around LinkedIn from time to time. And in fact, a nice listener sent me a LinkedIn request today and said, I just wanted to give you a non-sales message on LinkedIn, which I really appreciate. Say some nice things about our show, and I appreciate that. That goes a lot.
I've started my campaign of trolling LinkedIn, so
it is dark and full of terror.
You'll start seeing me more often on LinkedIn, I think, but it won't be pleasant.
I do. Occasionally I have some interesting conversation there, but I threw something out the other day I get these random messages about, hey, do you have 15 minutes to give me your feedback on this product I'm building for InfoSec? And my suspicion is most of these are backdoor sales pitches. And so I threw it out there to LinkedIn. And a lot of people had some interesting opinions that some is, some isn't. You just don't know until you're stuck in the call and now enduring a potential sales pitch. But and it's tough because I obviously I wouldn't do this show if I didn't want to give to the community my opinion on things. So I like the idea of being an advisor to product people who are trying to build something useful, but this feels like an ego stroking way to give me a sales pitch, which I don't often have time for. So it's like, I was trying to figure out how I figure out the difference, and got a lot of interesting commentary on LinkedIn. So I think what we came away with was a small advisory fee will weed out the real people from the salespeople trying to sell me something.
Interesting. Yeah, I've often thought that it reminds me of the IT version of the timeshare sales dinner, right?
Yes, exactly. Though I do get a ton of, hey, come to our event for free dinner. It's going to be conversation about that. Like I get a lot of those too. And honestly, I just don't have time. I'm sorry. I just don't have time. I'm a busy guy. I value my free time. What little of it I have.
Well, speaking of free time,
you can cut this whole portion out. Anyway, thanks everybody. Have a great week. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you found this useful, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.